In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. So you don't have, sorry, be seated. So welcome to St. Peter and Paul Greek Orthodox Church, our annual Lenten lecture series, year 2024. Our topic, theme this year is fostering vibrant local Eucharistic communities. And just for the sake of our video production, I'll read the introduction to that theme. Jesus promised that the gates of hell would not prevail against the church, but in our secularized and digitalized age, it feels like we as Christians are in battle. This lecture series will provide a renewed vision for the life of the local church communities in which every member is equipped to fulfill their God-given role in the body of Christ, serving one another and witnessing to the world. The lectures will provide guidance for practical, personal, and community transformation based on decades of ministry experience and in-depth academic study. Our guest speaker for the whole of our Lenten lecture series is Dr. Nathan Hoppe. And just allow me to briefly, reintroduce him this evening. Nathan is the author of the new book entitled Fostering Local Eucharistic Communities, based on his years of service in Albania and his academic research at St. Vladimir's Seminary. Nathan was born and raised in Colombia, South America, into a missionary family. He holds master's degrees from Wheaton College and Holy Cross Greek Orthodox School of Theology and a Doctor of Ministry degree from St. Vladimir's Theological Seminary. Nathan has served as an Orthodox Christian missionary, a mission center missionary in Albania under Archbishop Anastasios for more than 25 years. Nathan, together with his wife Gabriella, directs the Central Children's Office of the Orthodox Church of Albania with a staff of 15 full-time workers. Its ministry is focused on fostering and facilitating the life of local Eucharistic communities. Nathan is a lecturer at Logos University in the Department of Theology and Culture and represents the Orthodox Church of Albania in a variety of venues, including the official dialogues with the Roman Catholic Church, the Lutheran World Federation, and the Worldwide Anglican Communion. Nathan, this is his third evening with us. The first lecture was titled Vision for a Vibrant Local Eucharistic Community, focusing on the Eucharistic life. This last week's presentation was Life in a Local Eucharistic Community, the Family of God, the Body of Christ, and the Temple of the Holy Spirit. And tonight, Nathan is speaking on practical tools to fostering local Eucharistic communities, including Christian formation, stewardship, and governance. So please welcome Nathan Hoppe.
Well, good evening, and thank you for coming out again. I don't know if it's just the food's so good or if you really want to hear me again, but I appreciate you being here, and I look forward to the discussion tonight with you. So what we'll be talking about tonight very much builds on our previous 2 weeks. So please remember those, or if you weren't here, maybe go back and watch the videos. But just very briefly, what we're talking about assumes that we believe we're living in Eucharistic life with God day by day. And we'll talk about some practical mechanics of how to do that, but we have to remember that that's the vision of what we're doing. And that we believe that we are a family. We believe that we are one body. We believe that we are a temple, so that we are bound together by things much stronger than ordinary human bonds, ordinary human clubs. And another important thing to realize that in the body of Christ, there are no levels of membership. You know, when you join other organizations, you can get the basic membership or the gold card or, the platinum membership. In the body of Christ, there are no levels. You are either part of the body of Christ or not. And this is really important because we tend to think of ourselves as, at different levels. And we think of some people, for example, monastics, as at a higher level and with higher responsibilities. They have a different role, but it's the same membership in the same body of Christ. And so as we talk about these three elements of Christian formation, stewardship, and governance, we have to realize that these are callings for every single member of the body of Christ. It's not something that, well, some people go for that intense stuff and other people aren't so involved. So just as a quick reminder of the 8 attributes that we've discussed that make up a vibrant local Eucharistic community. And we've said that this is really the essential unit of life in the church, and that we are members of the church through being members of a particular local community. We aren't members of the church at large. And so the last 2 weeks, we've talked about the idea of Eucharistic life and community life, and for the sake of time, I won't repeat those. But tonight, we're going to be looking at Christian formation, stewardship, and governance. And these are really practical outworkings of those other 2. To a certain degree, what we were talking about in the previous 2 weeks could have felt a little theoretical. Nice ideas, but how does that really work? So we're going to try to get to the practical, how does it really work tonight a little bit more. So we used the image of a garden. We talked about being fruitful when we are in the environment that God created for us to flourish. And we are like vines, say tomato vines in that garden, that need all of these different aspects of the environment that we are in to flourish. And so the first one of those that we're going to look at tonight is Christian formation. So as we've done other nights, if somebody could read the slide. Does the microphone out there work, Father? If somebody wants... Should be working. Could somebody read a slide out loud just as a, so, yeah.
Christian formation is the intentional process through which members of LECs are conformed to the image of Christ. It will include formal preaching and teaching as well as small group and personal study. It is both the intellectual knowledge of the Christian faith as well as personal participation in the life of prayer and worship.
Okay, so an important thing here is that this is not called Christian education. Okay, too often we think we need to transfer information so we have Christian education. And information transfer is important. We need to know things. But our Christian faith is not simply knowing stuff. And a real easy way to understand this is if we think about the demonic world. The demons know everything, and it doesn't help them much. So just knowing can actually be demonic. It is a matter of transformation, of being. And we really need to attend to 3 areas of this. So it is mental formation. We need to form our minds. And this is knowing things, but we also need to be careful of this, and we need to start at the beginning. This has been said because it's a very good place to start, but we need to start at the beginning with what we intentionally learn. Now, Archbishop Anastasios, that I serve under in Albania, often says, we put a great deal of energy into studying things like theosis and the noetic mind and things like this, and people don't know who Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are. And so it's really important for us as Orthodox Christians to begin with the basic story of the Christian message, the basic story of salvation. So it's interesting, as we do each year, this year, the church has called us to read Genesis during the fast. Now, I won't ask for a raise, for hands, but in most contexts, if I did, the number of us that have actually ever read Genesis from beginning to end, the 50 chapters of Genesis, would be very few. And if you haven't ever read Genesis, you can't possibly understand the New Testament. You can't possibly understand what the rest of the Christian story is. And that's just one example. Father Thomas Hobko, before his death, did a series on the Divine Liturgy. But the first, I think, 20 or 30 episodes of his podcast on the Divine Liturgy were on the history, on biblical history, on the Bible, because he said we can't possibly talk about the Divine Liturgy if we don't know the Scriptures, because everything in the Divine Liturgy assumes that we know the scriptural story. So we do need to be formed mentally. We need to know things. And guess what? This takes a certain level of just discipline. We won't learn if we don't discipline ourselves to study. So, how much time each week do we spend actually reading and studying materials that will grow our ability to know our Christian faith? And here, the Christian story is really important. We know, and whether we know it or not, we know who we are by the story that we tell ourselves about ourselves. And sometime when you have time to think about this, driving home tonight, think about it. How do you know who you are? You tell yourself who your parents are, what work you do, and things like that, but they're tied together by a thread of a story. All of those individual things by themselves would not mean very much. But we tell ourselves a story about ourselves. And for us as Christians, if our story is not the story of God's plan of salvation for the world, then we will be very confused people. We will not have a truly Christian identity. Our second area of attention to formation is our emotions. Now, when I say this, people often say, but we can't control our emotions. They happen to us, right? Well, often they do, but they don't have to. And if you want to get a picture of this, think about if you were in a terrible accident, covered with blood, and you go into an emergency room. Would you expect the doctor to freak out and start running around and saying, oh my God, what are we going to do? No, you wouldn't, right? You would expect the doctor to be very professional. He or she would know what to do, and they would do it regardless of the situation they're confronted by. And why is that? Because over time, they have trained their emotions to be able to confront difficult and tragic situations and continue to operate well. So we as human beings can train our emotional life to react well to things. Now, this begins in early childhood. It's one of the reasons why childhood is so important. Why some people say, 5 is forever and things like that. If we haven't begun to train the emotions of our children when they're very small, it's much difficult later. But even later in life, we can train ourselves. And again, this is one of the reasons why we have Lent. It's one of the reasons why we have long services. It's one of the reasons why we do things like fasting. Because as long as you're comfortable and well-fed and everything is fine, it's very easy to be in a good emotional state. But when we intentionally put ourselves in challenging situations, we begin to train our emotions to react well. And then finally, we need to train our bodies. We as human beings are one unit as an embodied person. And our bodies have a lot to do with who we are. And we need to train our bodies so that we are, as persons, are in charge and not run by our bodies. Again, this is one of the reasons why we fast. By fasting, we train our bodies that just because the body wants a drink, just because the body wants food, it doesn't have to have it. It can wait. And so there's a lot in that. And what do these look like? shortcuts, pathways in the grass, right? Now, have you ever seen these in parks and on college campuses and things like that? So they're all over the place. Now, the interesting thing is all of those used to be grass at one point. And one person found a convenient place to walk, and then another person followed them, and another person followed them, and it makes a trail. And once there's a trail, then obviously it's the way to go. Now, this is a perfect symbol of how we function as human beings. We, again, are embodied humans. And in our bodies, we are made up of muscles and nerves that have memories, and they are formed by what we do. So very young children have hugely complex neural pathways, amazing numbers of connections in their nervous system, huge wiring, and it's really like electrical wiring. And the interesting thing is the parts they use, they keep. The parts they don't use, they lose. And the parts they use and keep grow and become stronger. They're like pathways in the grass that get walked back and forth over. And this is why, for example, small children learn languages very easily. They have all the neural pathways to do that. And if we've learned a second language as a small child, we can learn a third one more easily because we have more of the neural wiring to do that. So that's everybody that studies these sorts of things agrees on this. So what does this mean for us? The things that we spend our time doing, we train our bodies to do. And the more we spend time doing them, the more we train ourselves to do them. So, and this is true of our muscles. You know, the first time you go to the gym, or the first time you kick a ball, it's awkward and hard. The second time it's a little easier. The 1,000th time, it's much easier. And the 10,000th time, it happens without us even thinking about it, right? And so things like coming to church and praying the divine liturgy may seem awkward and weird at the beginning. But if we train ourselves to do these things, they become easier and easier. So this is an artist rendition of what those neural pathways in our brains look like. We have the job of cultivating our minds and bodies, ourselves, to be the kinds of people that we choose to be. And this means that we choose the things that are good for us, and we choose to avoid things that are not good for us. So this is a complex process, and it's very important to realize that this is an essential part of our life as Christians. Now, many of us have children, grandchildren who play sports, right? Do any of us expect them to become great athletes by accident? Do any of us expect our children never to go to their athletic practices and then to go out to the game and be brilliant? No, we don't. We expect that they will go to practice and they will try and fail and over again, and they will improve. But if we compare the amount of effort that we put into training our children as Christians and that we train them as basketball or baseball, or how do those numbers compare? For the most part, not very well, right? We spend a lot more time training our young people as athletes for worldly games than we do as athletes of Christ. So it's one of the really interesting things that in the early Christian martyrdoms, if you read the early Christian martyrdoms and the accounts of Christians in the amphitheaters in the early centuries when the Romans were persecuting Christians, one of the analogies they use is athletics. And one of the things that they say, and the interesting thing, we hear in church generally, we hear the stories of the martyrs that overcame, that stayed faithful. But in almost every martyr story, there are martyrs that did not, that gave up, that quit. And in the martyr stories, it's emphasized the ones who were trained in the way of the gospel were the ones that succeeded. So training is so important. And we don't have time tonight to go into all of the depth of how training happens. But the first thing I want to say is that this is an essential part of our identity as Christians. And again, we can't be partially in the body and partially out. When we sign up, and in the early church, it's what it was called when somebody decided to become a Christian. When they entered as a catechumen, it was called enrollment. And it was the same word that was used for joining the Roman army. When we sign up for being Orthodox Christians, we sign up to commit ourselves to a rigorous process of Christian formation. And people who don't want to do that ought not sign up. Everybody, and this is really important, everybody is welcome, but they are welcome to sign up for intense formation. And this is where we need to cultivate in our church a culture of participation. Now, for the most part, and I don't know your community enough, and I'm not judging any of you or your community, but most of our communities have cultures of apathy. They have cultures of non-participation. And it is very hard to run the race well in the midst of a culture of apathy. And this is particularly true for our children. If you place kids in a group of other kids that are excited about something, they will be excited about it. No matter what it is, almost anything, and that's why kids do really stupid things sometimes. But if you place kids in a culture of apathy, they'll all be apathetic. And so by allowing our churches to be cultures of apathy, and particularly for the young, we demonstrate, we form them as apathetic Christians. And so our apathy breeds apathy. And if we are to be healthy local Eucharistic communities, we have to change that. We have to be as committed to forming ourselves and our children as Christians as we are at forming ourselves in professions that we lead and our children for the athletics that they participate in. So what are some things we can do? Some things in forming the mind, some resources. We were talking about this a little at the table just now. And there is a whole ton of stuff out there. You can find all sorts of stuff, and a lot of it's awful. So there are bad materials online, but there are also great resources. So, the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese has the online chapel and lots of articles and all sorts of stuff. Now, one of the great things, if you go to the Greek Orthodox webpage, you're not going to get wacky things. You're going to get solid Orthodox materials. Go there, read it. Read the daily scripture readings. It takes like 3 minutes, 2 minutes maybe. So read those. Read articles, read about the feast days, read. It's easy. We can say a lot about the digital world that's unhealthy, but this is easy. Ancient faith, if you're not familiar with it, Google it, find it. It is an immense resource of wonderful things. Podcasts, books, audiobooks. Almost all of us spend time driving places. View your time in your car as times of Christian formation. It's amazing how many books you can read. And after you have a little practice, you can actually speed them up. And then you can read them at double speed, and you can read even more books. And they're great. Now, this is easy. This is like just totally doable stuff. Another app that's great, and there's lots of these. I'm just mentioning, but the YouVersion Bible app. If you don't have that, there's like dozens of different English Bible translations on it. It's free. They're audio. Again, in your car, when you're doing chores, whatever you're doing when you're exercising, have the app there and listen to the Bible. Listen to it. Listen to it again. Listen to it again. And listen to it again. And then start over and listen to it again. There is not too much Bible reading. You know, in the monasteries, they read the book of Psalms every week. Okay? They read over and over again. Now, we're not in the monasteries. Maybe we're not going to do that. But sometimes. And then, you know, there's lots of resources there. If you want to do more in-depth study, and just one resource, but the Logos Bible software is a incredibly advanced structure. There are huge, I mean, hundreds and hundreds of Orthodox books there. This one will cost you money. But it's funny, you know, we'll invest money in all sorts of things, right? You know, hundreds of dollars to go to a ball game or something like that. You know, for a few $100s on Logos, you can get the Church Fathers, you can get, you know, original languages, you can get all sorts of things to study. So, study. It's a great thing to do. Now, this seems like totally obvious, doesn't it? It's like, of course. But the reality is, for most of us in most of our Orthodox churches, our level of formation is really elementary. And particularly for us as parents and grandparents, we are the trainers, the coaches for the next generation. If we are not training ourselves, or if we are not training the next generation to be Christian, the world is very actively training them not to be. The world has a program for our kids. If we do not actively form them as Christians, and from very young ages, we will not succeed. A really wonderful resource for doing that from Ancient Faith, again, you can get it as an audiobook, but Parenting Towards the Kingdom is a wonderful resource for the philosophy of how, and practically, how do we train kids to be members of the kingdom. Now, this is just an elementary part of what it means to be Christian, but everything else hangs on our formation as Christians. And then the next thing, two things we're going to talk about in stewardship and governance are impossible if we're not forming ourselves. So this is a totally doable thing. We can invest in our formation. And again, this isn't for the platinum level members of the church. This is a permission to play. This is, if we don't want to do this, we should admit that we do not care to be followers of Christ. And it's better just to admit that and then, go on and do something else. And we need to cultivate that culture in our church that we are all actively seeking to be formed together. All right, we're going to move on to stewardship. And stewardship, mostly you hear that word when we talk about money, and money is part of it, but it's much broader than just our finances. So again, we have a little definition, if somebody would read that. It gives you a break from listening to me. Anybody? Okay.
Stewardship is the godly administration of all the resources to which God has given responsibility to each member of the church community. This is not primarily an issue of providing necessary resources for church ministries. It is rather a manifestation of Christian discipline and Eucharistic life. It covers all resources, including financial, time, and talents. stewardship is practiced, all members will be equipped for the work of the ministry.
Okay? So, stewardship is not fundraising. If we have real stewardship, we never need to do fundraising. But finances are only part of it. And this is a thing that is, it's totally throughout the Bible. Jesus talks about money and our gifts and what we do with those over and over again, and the authors of the New Testament do as well. So, what is a steward? A steward is a person that manages things that don't belong to them. Okay? So a steward is somebody who can be asked for accountability for what they do with what they manage. Now, the thing for us, when we become Christians, when we are baptized into Christ, we don't belong to ourselves anymore. We belong to Christ. And He will ask accountability of us for what we have done with our lives. So, and we won't read this whole one, but each one of us have received gifts that we must be good stewards of. So, this is important to think about. What have we received and how will we steward it? So, again, St. Paul, and we won't take time to read the whole passage, but each of us have been given gifts, and it is the task of our leaders to equip the saints for the work of ministry. So, ministry, the work of serving the body of Christ, all of the people, is to be done by the body of Christ. Now, we too often have a professional mentality about this. We think that we hire somebody, put them in a black dress, and it's their job to do ministry, right? And we're paying them to do it, and so it's their job to serve us, and we want good service for pay. Well, that is not an Orthodox model of church. It is how it is done often, but it is wrong. The ministry of the church is a ministry done by each and every one of us. And you see it sometimes in our church. Tonight, some people practiced the stewardship of serving a meal. That's a wonderful aspect of ministry. But it's not just that. Now, is it possible for Father to do all the teaching that is necessary for 2,000 some people in your community? No. Does he need to? No. Now, of course, it's Father's responsibility to make sure that everything is done properly in good order, that we avoid heresy and all of those things. But it is not his responsibility to do all of the ministry. And this completely transforms our paradigm of understanding what life in the church is. So the question for each one of us is, how am I practicing stewardship of my time and my talents? Now, it's important to understand that we are all given many responsibilities. So, we have a cake to cut. We have all that God has given us to be responsible for, our whole lives. And he's given us different aspects. He's given us our biological families. And as parents, we're responsible for our families. So some part of the pie needs to be for housing and clothing our families. Some part of our time needs to be for raising our children. Some part of our time needs to be going to work. But we need to remember that our primary family is this one. It is the family of Christ. And so as we consider how to distribute the things for which Christ has given us responsibility, we need to think of the whole family. and not just our little part of it. So the easiest thing to measure in all of this is money. And it is one of the areas that we fall most obviously short. So again, each one of you know what you do, and I'm not here to talk about you or to judge anybody. But in general, in our Greek Orthodox churches, the average annual stewardship per pledged steward is somewhere around $1,000. I don't know what it is at this community, don't need to know, don't want to know, but now that's scandalous. It's scandalous that we, in our wealth, agonize over how we're going to afford things. Do you ever think of that? How just scandalous it is that we are controlled by decisions about affording things. Now, we are so incredibly wealthy, so incredibly gifted by God. God has given us so much. And if we gave even a few percent of that to our churches, to the broader family of God, imagine how that would free up our ministries. Imagine how that would allow us as a church to minister to the broader community. Imagine how that would allow us to do missions to the world. So, nobody likes to talk about money, but Jesus talked about money a lot. And it is one of the fundamental things. And again, the primary point here isn't that the church needs our money. Now, the church will function better if we are good stewards and provide money to the church. But the biggest thing is a game in which we have no skin. If we don't have skin in the game, we're not really playing. It is a fundamental part of our process of being transformed in Christ. If we wish to participate in theosis, a fundamental part of that is giving our money over to God's direction. Now, yes, of course, part of our resources will be for feeding, clothing, caring for our biological family. But if we look at the way that most of us, and again, not speaking in particular about anybody, I don't know your finances, but in the Orthodox Church, administer our finances on God's behalf. You know, the slice of pie for God's family, or slice of cake, is a really little one. And if we sat down and had coffee with Jesus and talked about, you know, how big of the piece of the pie should be for Jesus' family, do you think he would agree with the way that we've done it? Maybe so. I don't know your finances, and God bless you for what you do. Okay, so money isn't everything, but it's a big part of it. It's the easiest thing to count, and it's something that will show quickly. And God will bless us. And an important thing here, and for all of the things we will talk about tonight, when we talk about God's blessing, it's not transactional. We can't buy God's favor. So it's not we give so many dollars and then God is happy with us and God gives us blessings. So blessings are transformational, not transactional. So when an athlete does good athletic training, they get a return on that, right? They get a reward. But that reward isn't, I mean, if you're a professional athlete, it might be cash. But in general, that reward is the transformation of themselves. That reward is them becoming what they had the potential to be. And in the end, that's the only reward that counts. And this is exactly what Jesus was talking about. He said, if you do deeds to be seen before men, you make that relationship with God into a transactional thing. People see you, they pat you on the back, they say, God bless you, you're such a good person. You got your reward right there. But see, a transformational reward is forever. A transformational reward is being transformed in the image of God and living the life of God that lasts forever. And so, transformation is so much better than transaction. We can never put God in our debt, but God is waiting if we will entrust ourselves to Him to transform us. So, that's stewardship. And again, these are huge topics. They could be hours by themselves, but just trying to get at the basic ideas that if we are not actively participating in Christian formation, we are not being transformed in ways that allows us to do ministry. If I haven't formed myself as a Christian, I can't serve you and help you as a Christian. If I am not actively in the process of transformation, I won't know how to be a good steward of what God has given me. And furthermore, I won't have much to steward because I will not have formed those gifts that God has given me into things that can be used. So the last thing we're going to talk about tonight is governance. And people also think this is a little bit of a strange thing, so why are we talking about governance? But it's really fundamentally connected to the previous two. And Christian communities do not work well if decisions are not made intentionally well in communities. So here again, look at if we can get somebody to read just for a break for me. Yeah, thanks.
Governance addresses the way in which decisions are made and leaders are chosen in an LEC. It will take a variety of forms depending on the cultural context and other factors, but what is important is that the LEC must operate as an organic unity as the body of Christ. Whether through formal structures or informal processes, all members of the LEC must participate in decision-making, and there must be strong support for decisions that are made.
Okay? So, again, this is not called leadership. It's called governance. And they're related things, but they're different. And this is the whole process of the way that we as a body get to where we need to be. Now, often people think that, well, either we're in America, so we must be a democracy. Or we are a church from the old countries, and so we must have a very strict structure of authority and basically imperial totalitarian. Neither of those are orthodox. Neither of those are Christian ways for things to be organized. We are not a democracy, and we are not a totalitarian structure. We are a hierarchy. And in a hierarchy, there is headship, but there is participation. So in a hierarchy, and this is why it's so important what we talked about before, we are a body. We are the body of Christ. The body has a head, who is Christ and manifest through our clergy and other leaders. The head is the brain that directs the body. But the brain does not do anything without taking account of the whole body. Every part of the body is a participant in decision making. And this is so important. So, in my body, in your body, the brain's in charge. But if my little toe is broken, there's going to be a conversation between the brain and the little toe if I decide to go for a jog. Okay? So the toe, as insignificant as it is, is a participant in every decision-making process because it's a body. Now, if I just want to go for a walk to smell the spring flowers, the toe may say to the brain, I don't think it's a good idea. We're not going to go today. But if I do go out in the woods and a bear comes along, then the brain's going to say to the toe, you know what? We are going to run anyway, even though it doesn't seem like something you'd like to do right now. So you see how a body functions. It takes account of everything. Hierarchy, but participation. So this is manifest in all through church history. This is one of the apostolic canons, and we won't take the time to read it in the Greek words, but basically, Canon 34, if you read about, structures in the church, it's talked about very often. And basically what it says is the leader can never do anything without the parts, and the parts can never do anything without the leader. So we are a unity, a wholeness. We serve one another. And we see this so well. We saw the Holy Trinity as that communion of persons in deference to one another at all times, with headship, but deference. We see it in Jesus, and again, we won't take time to read the whole text, but Jesus was a servant leader. The night before he was betrayed, he washed his disciples' feet. He served them. He was always ready to give himself for them. And this is real power and real authority. So in the church, we are led. Authority comes from Christ, who, though he was ruler of the universe, was born in a stable. He washed his disciples' feet, and he was crucified for us. Now, if we want to be leaders and say other people have to obey us, are we ready for that? Are we ready to be those that are sacrificing ourselves for others? Now, and of course, in the church, we have the hierarchical structures and the clergy that are leaders, but we have many other roles and functions of leadership. But it's leadership, governance in a body, and where we do not practice totalitarian domination. This is one of our big challenges in Albania, because they lived under communist totalitarian systems for so long. The default setting for leadership there is, if I'm in charge, I have to make sure that I am big and everyone else is small. It is a heritage of what they suffered. And, things are changing and people are developing, but that is a default. And bringing people back to this servant view of Christian governance is a big challenge. So those are the three areas that I wanted to present to you tonight that are fundamental to our identity as Christians. And these are not things that are optional. It's not, I want to, take out the Orthodox Christian membership, but I'm not going to buy any of the Christian formation, stewardship or governance parts of that. I just want the basic model. This is basic to our identity as Christians. And because often it is not practiced as that, we tend to have cultures in our communities where we have little participation. We have low commitment. And our challenge is to foster cultures that are different. And this is one of the areas historically that we see a change when the church in the early centuries moved from the pre-imperial to the imperial structures. So in the pre-imperial church, getting into the church was a difficult process. It took often years of Christian formation. The church needed to know for sure that you were ready for what the challenges would be. And they had to trust one another, seriously trust. Your life could depend on people. And so they had structures that were aimed at keeping the wrong people out of the church, because they knew if people who were not really committed to the fullness of the lordship of Christ came into the church, they would dilute the church, ruin its witness, and destroy it. After the emperor converted and the people were flooding into the church, then the church sort of thought, well, we've got to get the whole community into the church. We've got to get all the right people in. And historically, that's what they did. Now, we can debate whether it was good or bad. The idea of creating a whole Christian society was interesting, but there was no longer this sense that membership means active intentional formation, active intentional stewardship, active intentional participation in governance. Now, we don't live in an empire anymore. We don't live in a broadly Christian society anymore. And it is, I think, really important for us as Christians to view our communities as communities where all of this is expected. Cultures where it's expected. Now, this is where it becomes tricky. We've got to be very careful not to judge one another. We started Lent with thinking about the Pharisee and the publican. And we can't be saying, well, I'm doing it all, but that person isn't. The point is not to be judging, but the point is to be cultivating a community where this is the culture that is expected. And you see this again, athletics is such a good example. Young people on a sports team, in general, you don't have to motivate them. They're motivated because they have a culture of motivation and they all want to play. They want to practice. They want to get better. You don't have to push them. Fans for our, major league sports, you don't have to push them. They come out, for football in the snow. You can't keep them away. If you did keep them away, that would be like cruel, because there are cultures of participation. So I think we have just a few minutes left. Are there any questions, thoughts, disagreements? So, yeah.
Going back to the stewardship concept, I'm sure you're aware that in many Protestant evangelical communities, the way that stewardship is approached is much more vibrant than what we have in the Orthodox Church. I guess the question is twofold. One is, how do you think that that's been? Why is it there and not here? And is there, in your opinion, how do we get there?
Okay, so there's several things. One is just basic history. Yeah.
So that mic is for the camera, so
Okay.
if you could restate the question.
Okay, so the question is, why is there the difference between the vibrance of practices of stewardship in some of our evangelical and other Christian traditions, between that and that we often see in Orthodoxy? So one of the basic things is just history. So, okay. So, historically, at different points, Orthodox churches, were in state structures where, the state structures paid the bills. And so we got used to the fact that the emperor was paying the bills, or some state structure like that, where people were paying taxes to a centralized structure, and that paid the bills. And so that got us out of the habit and the practice of practicing stewardship. So as you may have noticed, we don't live under an emperor anymore, and he doesn't pay our bills. And so, it is an opportunity for us to go back to an authentic way of thinking. And it's really interesting. In the 4th century, you see the beginnings of the change in this. And the pagan structures were very dependent on state subsidies in the late Roman Empire, as before Christianization. And one of the main ways that paganism disappeared is the state stopped paying for it. And so it just kind of withered away because it was dependent on state subsidies. And in the early 4th century, after the conversion of the empire, the Christians were paying their own way, so they didn't feel much need for the emperor to tell them what to do. And there's some very graphic times where they tell the emperor, get lost. You do not have a right to tell us what to do. But gradually, they became more dependent financially on the state. And then that gave less bargaining room. So those historical issues are one of the basic things. The other issue, and forgive me, but too often our connection with our Orthodox life, and regardless of what ethnic tradition we're in, is more connected to our ethnic identity than our Christian identity. And so we view it more as a club that we give as much as we feel like in. Yeah, we pay dues. But for people in other traditions, where this idea of total commitment to Christ is foundational to what they're talking about, then obviously finances are going to be part of that, and it's very much taught. And 10% is in many communities just thought of as a basic threshold. That's sort of the permission to play, and then anything else is extra. And it's interesting that even like John Chrysostom, the great preacher in the 4th century, said, during the time for the Jews, 10% was what was required, and we should be ashamed only to do as much as they did. So I don't know, it's a huge subject, but I think as we grow in our Christian formation, our stewardship will grow. And if we have weak, lukewarm Christian formation, we have weak stewardship. So who was next? I think, yeah.
When you were talking about how the Christians were, in the beginning, that they were really involved and studied, and it took years to be, what happened when they had children? Did they baptize them and they were in the church like they are now, or did they have to wait until they were a certain age to pledge to be a Christian?
So the process of moving towards infant baptism is something that is not super well documented, but in general it does seem like that was widely practiced, at least in the pre-imperial church, in the first centuries. And so children were brought in, but they were formed, and it was assumed that children who were baptized young were being formed as Christians. And this is, and honestly, this is one of those sort of controversial things, but I wonder why we baptize children of families that we know aren't participating in the church. Because there's a dishonesty to it, because baptism is for children that are going to be raised as active members of a church community. And if we're baptizing children that we know will not be raised as active members of communities, there's a certain way where we're not being completely honest about it. So, yes, Brad.
When and why did the practice change of the catechumens leaving for the second part of the service?
Basically with the conversion of the empire. So, before, and while the empire was still under persecution, or what the church was still under persecution, the sacraments were held as very sacred, and they didn't want people who were not yet fully committed present there. Fairly early in the 4th century, as there was this thing of bringing everyone in, then that began to be not practiced anymore. Again, it's not super well documented exactly how and when it changed, but it was a fairly quick process when that started to change. And then, of course, fairly soon, there really weren't catechumens anymore, because everybody was baptized as small children, and So the catechumens became rare in a lot of church communities, which it's really wonderful that we preserve those prayers in our liturgy still, even when often we don't have very many catechumens. But then the question is, what are we doing to bring them? And so we'll talk next week more about our apostolic identity as Orthodox Christians and our calling to bring the world into the church. Other questions? So, well, thank you. So this gets into more of the just nitty-gritty of things. But if we're not willing to do these basic things that it takes to really form a Christian community, we're not going to succeed. And then we wonder why we're failing. And we're failing because we're not really playing the game fully. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathan. We look forward to seeing you next week and seeing hopefully as many people as can return as possible. This time we'll stand and we'll have a prayer. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. O Lord and Master of my life, take from me the spirit of sloth, faint-heartedness, lust of power, and idle talk, but rather give to me, your servant, a spirit of chastity, humility, patience, and love. Yes, O Lord and King, grant me to see my own faults and not to judge my brother or sister, for you are blessed to the ages of ages. Amen. Have a good evening. God bless. Don't forget Veneration of the Cross this Sunday.